Hello! In this video, I will be walking you through the step-by-step process of how to set up your Infinite Campus gradebook to align with SBG 2.0. Let's get started. So the first step of Gradebook Setup is to assure that all of the standards that you need have been added into your Infinite Campus as categories. I will go ahead and quickly remind how we can do that in case you need the refresher. So first, you'll open up your settings menu here, and under Gradebook Setup, you should select Categories. This should open this dialog box that lists all of the categories you've already input. If you don't see the standard that you need listed, you will select the Add button. Once you select Add, it will open this dialog box that will allow you to input all of the necessary information about your standard. For the name, you should title it the abbreviation of the standard, and then a small blurb about the content of the standard so that it's more easily recognizable to yourself and students. You will then select whichever sections that standard applies to. In my case, this is a 7th grade standard, so I've only selected my 7th grade section. Very important, you want to assure that all of the weights of your standards are equivalent. 1 is generally the easiest number to remember, so I would recommend assuring that all of your standards are consistent with a weight of 1. You can skip sequence, skip exclude from calculation, and drop lowest score. Finally, we want to make sure that we've selected the appropriate scoring type. You should select marks in the drop-down menu, and then Crossroads rubric level in the subsequent menu that pops up. You want to make sure that default points is 4, since we're on a 0 to 4 grading scale, and our multiplier can be left as is. Once your dialog box looks like this, you are ready to go and hit save. You should then see that standard reflected in your category list, and this means that you're ready to input your grades for that standard. Now that you have your standards input, we're ready for the next step of the process, which is to input our weighted assignments. In order to add your weighted assignments, you will come over to our Add menu, as you would with any assignment or grade that you're inputting. Go over to the dialog box that we have here. Now we're ready to set up the first of our 2 weighted assignments for this standard. First, you should start with your title. The title for your weighted assignments should be as follows: W1 and then the abbreviation of the standard. So for example, W1 MS LS1 1. This will easily tell parents and students that this is the weighted assignment and the standard that it is corresponding to. Now we're ready to move on to our date information. Since students do theoretically have the entirety of a marking period to score these top 2 scores, I would recommend your start date being the first day of the quarter and your end date the last day. Input day 1 to the final day of the quarter. We're ready to move on. Here we will select grading on, which should start as a default, and we want to assure that include in grade calculation is checked off. That should be the default. Now we're ready to change our abbreviation. Your abbreviation for this assignment should simply be W1. Sequence can remain as is, and we can continue. For the category, you will select the drop-down menu and choose whichever standard this particular grade aligns with. In our case, we're looking at MSLS11, so we're good to go there. This should all fill in default, but you want to assure that your grading task reflects marking period, scoring type is marks, marks are your Crossroad rubric levels, 4 points, and a multiplier of 1. Once you've input all of this information, you are officially finished inputting your first weighted score. Now we simply need to repeat this process for the second weighted score. The easiest way to do that is to simply duplicate this assignment and make some small edits. So I'll go ahead and do so. Once I duplicate, it's going to create an exact copy, except with titles changed to copy of. So all I need to do here is get rid of copy of and change my W1 to W2, since this is the second weighted score. The date still stands as a start date of first day of quarter and end date of last, so we can skip all of that. Everything else you see here is consistent except for our abbreviation. We should go ahead in and update that abbreviation to simply say W2 to represent weighted 2. Now that we've input our 2 weighted assignments, you can see here they reflect the correct abbreviation, weighted 1 and weighted 2, the same standard, the correct number of points, and they both correlate to the same standard. We're now ready to input our unweighted assignments, which are our specific individual assignments for this standard. So to input an unweighted assignment, of course, you're going to come over to Add to begin a new assignment. Now, in this case, we are representing our unweighted assignments. So our title should start with UW and then whatever the name of the assignment is that you are inputting for this standard. So for example, for this 7th grade standard, the first assignment that they are going to complete for this is their microscope investigation. So in this case, I will title this UW and the name of the individual assignment. Now in this case, I would update my due dates to reflect the due dates of that actual assignment, just like you would with any normal assignment you've input. For grading, the most important piece here is to assure, since this is our unweighted assignment, we want to unclick Include in Grade Calculation so that when this score is input, it is not considered or calculated into the final score that's reflecting in Infinite Campus. We'll go ahead and change our abbreviation to UW1 since this is the first assignment that I've put in for this standard. We'll ensure that our category aligns to the appropriate standard. Our grading task is marking period, marks, crossroad rubrics, 4 points, and a multiplier of 1. Once we've completed that, we are ready to hit save, and we officially have our first unweighted assignment. We'll leave for a second here to check and make sure. All of my unweighted assignments should have this small asterisk in front of the abbreviation when viewed in Infinite Campus. That is telling us that this score is not going to be included in the grade calculation, which is what we want. The only scores that should be calculated into that final grade calculation are our weighted scores. Now that we have our first unweighted, we can simply come in and duplicate for as many assignments as we have for that given standard. For example, the second assessment that students will complete for this standard in my class is the cells quiz. So I will duplicate that assignment, update the title to UW cells quiz. I can update my dates as necessary. Make sure we come in and change our abbreviation to now UW2 since this is the second unweighted assignment I've input. Ensure that all the rest of this information stays the same, making sure that include in grade calculation is unchecked, and hit save. Now I would continue to input unweighted scores for as many assessments as I give students for that standard. Before we finish, I want to go ahead and show an example of how we would then input grades using the unweighted and the weighted categories. So let's say a student comes and takes their microscope investigation and scores a 2. Once that score goes in, you can see that it's not reflecting in the in-progress score. That's a good thing. It shouldn't because this is our unweighted score. However, we do want parents and students to know where their student stands. So we want to make sure that we are also updating our weighted score as we go. So I would fill in the first weighted score with a 2, which would then start to reflect in the in-progress grade. If this student then comes and scores a 3 on the next assessment, I would place it in the unweighted. We can see grade does not change. And I would also add that in as my second weighted score. Now, if I were to assess them a third time on this standard, I would input another unweighted score, which would come in as unweighted 3. Now let's say this student scores a 4 on that assessment. I would come in and I would select whichever is the lower of the current scores, and I would update that to reflect now the top 2 scores on that standard. Of course, if you have any questions about how to set up your gradebook or how to input grades, I am available for that at any time. And with that, I conclude.